This week on Quality Digest Live, we're going to show you how to dazzle your customers.
Plus, does pay for performance destroy quality? We'll find out when we come back.
Welcome back to Quality Digest Live for January 11th, 2013. QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest.
And I'm Quality Digest Editor-in-Chief, Dirk Ducharme. So Mike, have you ever seen an industrial robot up close,
Yes.
like maybe at IMTS? Okay,
Yes,
so you've seen them, you've got the big arm that comes out. And, okay, so you know what we're talking about here. So, well, if you look close, you're going to see that at the business end of a manufacturing robot, there is something that is specific to the task. The thing on the end of a robot arm is called an end effector, and you might have seen something like a welder. Matter of fact, I think we have an image here that we can pop up. So if you're looking at what we got here, we've got, this happens to be a FANUC robot, and on the end of this one happens to be a welder. Okay, now there's other types of end effectors. You could have a 2-finger gripper or a 3-finger gripper. Sometimes you might have some sort of rotary tool that might be an abrasive of some sort, or maybe a milling bit or something of that sort. But the problem is that if you want that robot to perform a different task, you have to change out the end effector, like changing out a tool in a CNC or maybe changing out a probe on a CMM. It's the same idea. It works, but it's time consuming, which also means it's a cost. Now, yeah, it can be automated. The robot can go over to a tool changer, drop off its 2-finger gripper and pick up a 3-finger gripper and come back and do the task. But you have to have a variety of end effectors. So you're paying for the cost of the end effector, plus you're also taking time to go and switch out the tool between operations. So at a January 24th workshop in Chicago, NIST researchers and their partners from industry will be asking manufacturers to identify where in production-related operations dexterous robots would provide the biggest boost to their production capabilities. Now, a dexterous robot is a robot whose end effector can do a variety of tasks. In other words, it isn't limited to just gripping or that type of thing. It can do multiple operations. And the goal of researchers around the world is to develop robot grippers with flexibility and sensitivity approaching that of the human hand, and that's why they call them dexterous robots. Dexterous robots, or dexterous end effectors, would transform how and where robots are used in manufacturing. It would really kind of open the door to new ways of making things in both large and small batches. And in fact, we have this is a dexterous robotic hand that was developed by, I believe this is Shadow Robot. You can see now this one is going to an extreme. This actually, the Shadow Robot dexterous end effector really looks like a human hand.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And I'm not sure that's exactly what NIST is talking about, but there's a lot of people that are developing these. And if you think about it, for a small batch, it makes sense. Typically where robots are used is really high volume, very repetitive operations. But if you had a robot that could do multiple types of operations, then it would make sense for smaller batches, because you could have a robot that could maybe mostly assemble or maybe completely assemble a product, because it would have all the capabilities within one end effector with having constantly switch out.
Switch it out, right, right. And that's going to be January 24th?
That's January 24th,
okay,
yeah. So if you're interested in that type of thing, you can find it actually on the NIST website or follow the link out there. If you're into robotics or looking at robotics for your manufacturing operations, it could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, NIST always on the cutting edge.
Yeah, NIST is fun.
Manufacturing.
Their website is great, by the way.
Yeah, really great stuff. Good people work for NIST, and so check that out.
Yep.
Great, thanks, Dirk. Okay, well, also in the news this week, a recent survey from the American Society for Quality indicates that when it comes to the supply chain, suppliers are confident and manufacturers
not so much so.
A little bit worried. A little bit worried. The ASQ's 2013 Manufacturing Outlook Study was conducted online toward the end of last year, and more than 1,000 manufacturing professionals participated. The survey looked at general economic prospects for manufacturers, uncovering some particularly interesting information about the supplier-customer relationship. For example, although 75% of suppliers were confident in their ability to service their customers, more than 1/3 of those customers expected supplier problems this coming year. Nearly 30% more weren't sure if there would be problems or not. Of those that anticipate problems with the supplier, only about 40% are planning to work with the partner on process improvements to mitigate their disruption. However, of that same group that are anticipating problems, nearly 30% are planning to work with their partner's competitors. Others, of course, are stockpiling inventory or investigating insourcing the production of the necessary part or component. So they're not, some are, but not many are planning to work with their current supplier to help them overcome these problems that they anticipate. They're going to say, well, we're going to either jump to a competitor, is the first thing they're going to think about doing, or they're going to say, well, hey, we're either going to just stockpile all of these parts that we need, or we're going to maybe try to do it ourselves. That's one of their solutions.
Right.
Now, the moral is that there is a rather big variance in the perception of the supply chain stability, depending on which side of the table you sit on, whether you're a supplier or you're a customer. We also see that the message is beginning to get through about the need to assess and mitigate for supply chain risk. However, more work must be done to better prepare for the inevitable disruptions that will inevitably affect supply chains in 2013, whether that's from natural disasters or economic disruptions. We know what happens. Now, overstocking inventory, for example, isn't a very lean way necessarily of solving the problem. But this is what some of these customers are doing when you look at the customer-supplier relationship. Supply chains, we know, are getting very, very complex. They're getting lengthy. It's an important part of these manufacturers' process, part of their work. So you need to understand how you're going to handle any risk that comes from it. Interesting to me is that we're just seeing risk become more and more prevalent in the thinking of how people are going to handle things, because we know things are going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in 2013, but something's going to happen. Some things are going to happen that are going to disrupt supply chain. So the steps that these customers are taking to handle that is interesting. And I found it interesting that they're not doing what, from a lean perspective, we think makes the most sense, which is to work with their partners.
Right.
Saying, okay, let's investigate what potentially could happen and come up with solutions. They're immediately looking to jump to others or do it themselves. Right. And again, stockpiling inventory certainly is probably the least preferable way to handle it, but that's being done as well. So good study there by ASQ. So for more on these two news items that we just talked about and the other pieces we're going to cover in the show, check out the story links just below the player page right there.
There you go. Well, you know, every now and then we let the big boss, Jeff Dewar, our CEO, write an article for us, and well, you know how it is, Jeff. He's up there in Seattle, you know, watching the Ross grow.
That's right.
And so you kind of feel sorry for him, you know. So we let Jeff write for us every now and then.
This is Jeff talking. This is Dirk talking right now.
This is Dirk talking.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff wrote a bang-up article last week called "How to Exceed Customer Expectations," and it was an interesting article which talked about dazzling your customers. This is something that you know, is kind of a common theme. But the big thing that leapt out for me on Jeff's article was the idea that well, first let's put up Jeff's equation. He had a little equation he did in the article here. If we can put up that slide. And it was that customer perception equals delivery divided by expectations. And he says, Jeff says, there are only two ways to raise customer perception: increase the value of what you deliver, or reduce the expectation. And here's the critical key: you are significantly in control of each variable. And I kind of went, what? I'm in control of the customer's expectations? I mean, that seems a little strange to me. But here to talk about it, and that idea is Jeff Dewar, CEO of Quality Digest. Hi, Jeff. How's it going this morning?
Hi. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
All right.
Hey, Jeff.
So, Jeff, tell me. I was a little surprised by that comment that as the supplier, we are in control of our customers' expectations. How in the world do we, let's say Quality Digest or anybody, control our customers' expectations?
Well, it's what insight you let them see into your organization. You know, I was in Bogota, Colombia a few years ago on doing some consulting work, all legal, and they put me up at a very nice hotel, you know, just a typical nice hotel from the outside. And as I walked in, you know, this lobby was just the most gorgeous thing I'd ever seen, with the stonework and the tile and the waterfalls. And it was a sort of a boutique hotel, so it was kind of smallish, but it was an amazing sort of effect that it had on you. Wow, So the immediate expectation that started to grow on me is I can't wait to see my room. And by 3 minutes later, by the time I got to my room, I mean, it was a doghouse. And the difference in comparison between what they had set me up to expect versus what they had delivered was tremendous. And I know I made an instantaneous, somewhere deep down in my consciousness decision that I'd never stay there again. And in fact, the room really wasn't that bad. It's just that it felt so much worse than what that I'd been led to expect. And that's the bizarreness, the craziness of customer expectations. It's not that there's some hardcore logic that's attached to always managing customer expectations. A lot of it is just, these dozens or hundreds of different little things that play on your psyche that cause you to start to expect something else. So in that respect, that hotel was very much in control and presented and managed and formulated the expectations that I had about the room that I would eventually sleep in.
Well, what's the positive? That's kind of a negative example of how the supplier, the hotel in that case, controlled your expectation. What's kind of the flip side of that, where you can in a positive, in order to increase customer perception, you control the expectation?
Sure. I'm on tech support with Microsoft the other day, and they give you you are the 34th person in line, and the estimated waiting period is 7 minutes, blah blah blah. And what they need to do, and what they do a good job at, is taking the averages of how long it's going to be, but they don't give me the actual arithmetical average and say it's going to be 7 minutes. They're telling me it's going to be 9 minutes, so that when on average, when the law of averages kicks in, that I actually get to the front of the line, I may have only waited 6 or 7 minutes, not the 9 minutes that they told me. They were essentially presenting me with a worst case scenario. And they were totally in control of the expectation, because I had no insight into any of the data except for what they told me.
So if I hear what you're saying, is that the way we're controlling expectations is, in a positive way, is if you tell somebody kind of the worst case scenario in terms of maybe delivery time or something like that, then you're setting them up to expect the worst case, and then if you come in under that, you're going to surprise them, and they're going to be delighted because things went quicker or better or whatever than what they were expecting. Is that what you mean?
Yes, precisely. And then there's another dimension to that, is when it's something that has to do with aesthetics, or the way in which a service is provided, or the way in which a product is packaged and delivered. You simply find out what the customer is expecting to begin with, typically by interviews or surveys or other sort of treatments that allow you to have some insight into the way they're thinking. And then you say, okay, this is what they're expecting. Now let's go back into our smoke-filled rooms and figure out how we might delight or surprise or enchant or thrill them in some way that is not on their current list of expectations. So that's the research-based side of it.
Jeff, do you think in this world of ours today, where customers have access quickly to every level of service that's out there at the world-class level, do you think every single company now has to kind of step up to the plate and be at a world-class level, because that's just what we've trained our customers to expect? I mean, wherever they are, they want to get things immediately. They want it service packaged exactly the way they want it. So everybody, all of us, from the smallest to the largest companies, have to meet that standard. Would you agree that that's the case?
I think so in many industries. Obviously some industries like telephone service, VoIP service, that it's becoming very commoditized. So you're competing basically only on price, because the differentiation between providers is so difficult. I mean, one of my favorite authors, Tom Peters, he talks about gasoline, and 1 molecule of gasoline is very difficult to differentiate from another molecule of gasoline. But what you can differentiate is at the point of service level, where you provided an experience for the customer at the retail level that is beyond the physical characteristics of the molecules of gasoline. And I think that to your point about, have we really sort of trained our customers to continue to expect an increasing level of on demand, the the immediate gratification, that kind of thing? Yeah, to some degree, sure. One of my favorite books was written by Regis McKenna about a decade ago, in fact, and it was entitled "This is the Age of the Never Satisfied Customer," and it talks specifically about the way in which we are really dealing with our providers in a real-time basis, and our expectations are never fully met. And it's a very difficult and moving target. But that's part of the game. I mean, that's part of the game that anyone who's providing a product or service is playing today, is trying to keep up with these increasing expectations. Obviously a lot of it driven by technology.
Okay, well, Jeff Dewar, that's Jeff Dewar, CEO of Quality Digest. Jeff, thank you for joining us this morning and enlightening us on how we can control customer expectations. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jeff. See ya.
All right.
Good stuff there by Jeff. Yeah, customers, hey, you know what? I mean, it's what we all do, right? I mean, we have to understand that managing expectations, always important. Dealing with customers, always important. And I have a story we're going to cover now, which also really talks about customers and expectations and how you, in a sense, and how performance really should deal with not pay necessarily maybe so much, but should deal with what the customers want and what the customer needs are. And that's a story by Trip Babbitt that appeared in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily, entitled "Pay for Performance, Still Destroying Quality." That was by Trip Babbitt, of course, again, on Monday's issue of QDD. My point being that really what Trip is talking about is pay for performance systems, which have been in place now for a long, long period of time, many years, decades, in fact. And you'd think that because they've been around for so long, they work really, really well, right? Well, not so much. And they don't work well in terms of what we just talked about, serving customers, meeting customer expectations. Because really, according to Babbitt, at least, who uses examples from some pretty far-flung examples, including from the NFL, from the New Orleans Saints. Who
that was
had
a different kind of pay for performance.
Different kind of pay for performance. The New Orleans Saints a year ago or so, where some of their players were compensated for injuring other players, getting them out of the game. I guess that's pay for performance. But it also talks about education, the education system, how that's becoming a pay-for-performance scale, of course business as well. And all of these examples, he really shows how it leads more to cheating. It really leads more to gaming the system rather than keeping your eye on what the ultimate prize is, again, serving your customers better.
Yeah, I know what he's saying, and I think that's a lot of the argument against pay for performance is, for instance, when we talk about pay for performance, when we're talking about schools or teachers, and, it gets into, well, we're going to use standardized testing in order to measure them, and we've seen that's, teaching to the test, and I think Tripp even talks about that in there. To me, that doesn't say that pay for performance doesn't work. It simply says that you're using the wrong metric to implement it. I don't think there's, in a capitalist society, it's all pay for. I mean, no matter how you look, we're all doing pay for performance in one way or another.
Sure, and I take some issue with it too, because I mean, in certain instances, there's no way of getting around it. I mean, there might be ways of, in many instances, of constructing the compensation so that it's not pay for performance in some way. But in high-level sales, how else are you going to do it? I mean, you need salespeople to pick up the phone and make deals, and you got to compensate them to do that appropriately, and you're going to compensate the ones that are best at it more than the ones that aren't so good at it. So I don't know how you get away from it in some instances, but I think he's talking about it across the board, is where in many cases it will lead to, again, gaming the system.
Yeah, and which his premise is that is destroying quality.
It's destroying it's destroying. It's taking people's focus away from what really matters, which is the good of the organization and serving customers.
Right.
Because you're bottom lining it. You're saying, well, what's in it for me? If I do this, if I do X, I'm going to get Y. So I'm going to do a lot of X, and I'm not going to worry about necessarily Z, which maybe is the ultimate good, which is making sure that the customer gets good service, gets their product in time, all that other stuff. I'm just going to write the order and not worry about it.
Right.
So that causes unhappy customers and ultimately lose customers.
So in that sense, he would be right. But again, to me, it gets back then, okay, then if you're saying that your salespeople are going to game the system in order to maximize their profits, then to me, what it says is you're measuring the wrong thing.
Probably, yeah.
Okay, and so don't throw out the pay for performance idea. Is kind of like, okay, what is the best way to measure, or what is another way to measure that that meets the needs of the salesperson, meets the needs of the company, and meets the needs of the customer. And to me, that just means you have to dig deeper into how you're going to measure this.
There's other oversight there as well, other than just the top line or the bottom line number. You have to remember now, Tripp, of course, Tripp is a systems thinker. So
he's a systems guy.
He's always going to look at it from a perspective of the system, okay? And he's a Demingite, and he refers to Deming in this piece. And Deming looked at the problem of pay for performance, not so much, but he looked at it from kind of an SBC perspective. He looked at it as the limits, right? I mean, there's going to be variations within a process based on what the limits of that process are, how that process is designed. And you can't necessarily improve the process by working within it. If you have variation that's too wide, you got to change the limits, right? And you can't necessarily just hope that by rewarding or abusing your people that are working within it, that you're going to improve the quality of the system.
Right.
It's a system. And to me, it was analogous to Deming's red bead experiment too, where it's the same kind of thing. I mean, if you have inherent variation within the system, rewarding the people that work within that system by giving them a big bonus or a smaller bonus
isn't going to change
the system, right. But it will cause the people to go in and try to change the system, or try to change their own part of that to benefit themselves, right? I mean, you have to understand, is it a common cause or is it a special cause? That's really what it all comes down to here. Right. And I think the other point I want to make, I know we got to move on pretty quickly here, but the other point I want to make here is that what Tripp points out is that personal ethics and the overall ethics of the organization are often very closely tied, because successful people that make money for the organization by making sales at any cost, are going to move up in the food chain. They're going to become the executives that are going to lead those companies. And if their personal ethics aren't that sharp, and if they personally don't have a good, clearly defined boundary as to what they should and shouldn't be doing, that's going to affect the entire organization. We've seen it with a lot of major organizations, you know, the Enrons of the world, where it becomes a seepage, you know, where ethics become something that's played fast and loose with, and that destroys companies. It's not just about quality; it's about destroying companies. Right. And yeah, we can argue. We had a quick little argument about it. This is something we could argue with a lot. Sure. But I think that ultimately, pay for performance has a place. I think it does have a place in certain instances, but I think that it also needs to be kept in check. There needs to be more oversight to it, because human nature is human nature. Right. And you have to understand that people are going to do what they have to do to benefit themselves and their families financially. Right.
So basically the upshot is pay for performance, not necessarily bad, not necessarily good. All depends on what you're going to do,
how it's managed
with the data, and how are you going to, what you're going to do with it.
How are you going to oversight?
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the topics that we cover quite a bit here on the show and in our editorial content is data. Mm-hmm. What data do you need? What do you do with the data, and who uses it? But a topic we probably don't really cover enough is how you present the same data or subsets of the information to different types of users. In other words, how important is it that you give only the most appropriate information to different groups of people? And an expert on this topic is our next guest, InfinityQS application engineer, Eric Weisbrod. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dirk, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Hey, man. How's
Eric,
it going?
How are you?
Good. How are you guys today?
Pretty good. So, Eric, you probably heard my introduction there. So, when we're talking about data, we're talking about maybe a process data that you're taking from, maybe a production environment. And I think what I'm interested in is what you've talked about, what you've spoke about, is that it's important to get the right information to the right people, even if the data all comes from, let's say, the same source. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Absolutely. It's all about getting actionable information, not just data. So we may have process data, we may have product data, we might even have information that isn't measurable data itself per se. It's there for traceability reasons, or because we have certain oversight requirements, and finding out what's important to whom and what information they need to take those appropriate actions is very important. A shop floor operator needs to adjust maybe a process, whereas a quality manager needs to react to a given quality issue, whereas a quality director may need to look more at the business aspect of things and profitability and where they're running and how can they leverage their process improvements to better serve the business to keep feeding the machine.
So are we talking dashboard, something like a dashboard, or you're saying that maybe the guy on the shop floor has a different, let's say, dashboard or a different view into data than, let's say, the manager does or the CEO does, or the quality engineer? I mean, is that what we're talking about?
Exactly. The things that make sense on the shop floor, control charts, for example, are exceptionally powerful tools. We all know that. We all love them. And as we go up the chain, though, as we get further and further along, it probably doesn't make sense for your quality director or your CEO to necessarily have to look at a large stack of control charts to determine how their business is operating. We can start to boil it down, maybe using the appropriate capability metrics, or those dashboard items, things like gauges and bar charts and line graphs, where we can take a look at the bigger picture and see how things have, say, performed over a given month or quarter or even a year, to help us with those general trends, to look at some of the bigger picture items, all the while from that same data set, allowing the operator to make those up to the minute changes that they need to keep running the products that we all rely on.
Okay, and quickly here, because we're running out of time, but what's the downside of giving too much information? We talked about limiting the amount of information, giving just the appropriate information to the right people. What happens if you're going the other direction and you're giving too much information to everybody?
In a word, paralysis. I think the thing that's most challenging is people get overwhelmed and they don't know which signals to follow. They don't know when to take those actions. And it very often happens where people have lots and lots of data but don't have that actionable information. So though they have lots of numbers at their disposal, they're not able to make the decisions they need to when they need to make them. And you can sift through lots of data post-analysis. That's not a big deal. Or it's possible. I guess it's still a big deal, but it's possible. Whereas, real time is a challenge.
Okay.
Yep, that's what we know as paralysis by analysis. I think is
that's right.
The term that most people use. That's right. Well, Eric, we're going to have to go right there, but thank you for joining us. I want to remind everyone out there that we're doing a webinar with you on this very topic. Dirk is going to be hosting it, and you're going to be presenting next Tuesday on the 15th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. So we'll see you then. We're going to get a deeper dive into this topic and really roll up our sleeves and get in a little bit deeper.
And if you're interested in that webinar, there is actually a link underneath the player page down there that'll take you out where you can sign up as well. So
Eric, thank you for joining us today. We'll see you on Tuesday.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, Eric.
See ya. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah, it's going to be a good webinar, Dirk. I know you're looking forward to that one. Getting into
this is a little bit more techie. Techie from a data point of view is what do you do with the data? How do you present it? Why exactly what we were talking about here? Why is it important to get the right data, the right people at the right time?
At the right time, and how you prevent that paralysis by analysis.
Right.
So
Exactly.
That's good stuff. Now, again, that's Tuesday, the 15th of January, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. You can register for that right below the player page.
Oh, and end of the month.
And speaking of tech, speaking of technical,
stuff,
that's right, tech stuff. We have a good show coming up on January 31st.
January 31st. Any of you who've been around with us long enough know that we work very closely with a calibration expert down in Sacramento, Craig Howe with CPM Labs. Some of you may have watched his gauging videos, Gauge How-Tos, Gauging 101. And we're going to have a live show with Craig coming up on January 31st.
January 31st.
This show is actually going to deal with, among other things, surface plates, how to calibrate a surface plate, how a surface plate is calibrated, a lot of information about surface plates that you may not know. And this is going to be a half-hour live show. But along with surface plates, we want to cover other topics as well. So if you've got any questions related to gauging or calibration, send your questions to us at qdl@qualitydigest.com. Do that right now while you're thinking about it, or get it to us real soon, and we'll get those questions on the show. Also, come and watch the show. It'll be 11 o'clock Pacific, January 31st. It is a live show, so if while the show is going on you have a question for Craig, go ahead and shoot it to us and we will answer it live on the show.
Live on the show, so that's a good opportunity for you to check it out, interact with, Craig's a great guy. Craig's a great guy. Craig
very
is
knowledgeable. So.
Very knowledgeable and a lot of great experience. You've probably seen us work with Craig. Dirk and Craig have a great rapport.
Yep.
So it'll be fun. It's going to be right here, and you'll be able to tune in right from the comforts of your own office. So make sure you mark your calendars. Again, that's Thursday, January 31st, our premiere episode of our new show on gauging. So that'll be a great live show. So check that out. All right, well, Dirk, that's our show for this week.
Okay.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to Jeff Dewar for joining us. Thank you to Eric Weisbrod of InfinityQS for joining us as well. And we'll be back at you next week with another great week of QDD and another week of QDL here next Friday.
That's right. Have a good weekend.
We'll see you. Bye.
Thank you.